Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning back in. I want to shoot a video, but I was just attacked by the biggest mosquito I have ever seen. It landed on my shoulder and it was an inch big. It was huge. It was disgusting. I've never seen a mosquito that big. And I live in an area where we have tons of mosquitoes, but it was like a different crazy looking mosquito. Anyways, guys, if we're talking big, that leads me into this great segue. We're talking glide baits today. So I've had a lot of questions recently about how to fish a glide bait and what's the best way to trigger bites. So, there's a lot of videos out there that talk about glide baits and, what glide baits to use and, where to throw them, but you don't see as many videos about how to trigger bites or what retrieves to utilize when fishing a glide bait. And I've got a handful of different glide bait retrieves that I'm going to show you guys and kind of walk you through why I use them and what the approach is. But it's really kind of the key to fishing a glide bait. Glide baits are really, really good baits for seeing what lives in your lake. You will get bit on it, but you're going to get a fraction of the number of bites you'd get if you were throwing a more traditional bait like a wacky rig or a crankbait. You just don't get as many bites on them. These big baits, the fish are just curious and they're interested. So they'll come out, look at it, follow it back to the boat, and you'll see some really nice fish. But a lot of times you won't get them to bite. But just because you didn't get them to bite doesn't mean you can't go back and catch them later. That's the best thing about glide baits. It's a really good search bait for locating areas that those fish are in so that you can go back with a traditional bait and catch those fish a lot of times. So it's a really good bait. It's just a fun bait to throw because you can see the fish behind it. And when you do get bit, a lot of times it's a really, really nice fish. So that's what we're going to talk about, some basics. This is, the glide baits come in all different sizes and shapes. This is one of my favorites. This is a Phoney frog. It's about an 8-inch bait, weighs several ounces. So you're going to want to pair the correct tackle, your rod and reel combination up to the size of the bait you're throwing. If you're throwing smaller stuff that's kind of in that ounce and a half range, you can get away with most traditional tackle. If you're throwing something that's bigger, you're going to want something that's a little bit stouter. You can get swim bait rods that are 7.5 to 8 feet long or even bigger, but there's times I don't like to go with a real long rod. Sometimes I like to go with a shorter rod if I'm fishing very specific objects, I'm making really specific casts, because the shorter rod will allow you to make more accurate casts. The key though with a swim bait rod is you want something that's got a softer tip so that when a fish does bite it, you have a better shot at hooking up and fighting that fish back to the boat. So let's head over to the riverbank and we'll walk you through some of the retrieves that I like to utilize and why I like to do it. All right guys, we got the Phoney frog down here. We're gonna make a few casts, show you the different presentations that I like to utilize with it. And just know that all glide baits work a little bit different, so it's going to take a little bit of time to get used to what action you can impart with that bait. The one thing I am going to state is you don't want to impart the action much with your rod. You don't necessarily need to be like twitching it back and forth. You can make almost all the action happen with just your reel and how fast you turn your reel handle. It's a much more controlled retrieve that way. So the retrieves that I like to do, and we're going to try to keep it around these leaves. The first is just a straight retrieve. Throw it out, a nice steady retrieve. You let it swim at a natural pace. That's a really good way just to get fish interest. And if you're fishing around targets, a nice slow retrieve is really something you can do that works well. I have found that too much action, you get less bites with more action versus a nice slow retrieve. So the next is just this, instead of doing a straight retrieve, you're kind of doing a half turn of the reel with a slight pause in between. And you'll get kind of a broken, straight swimming pattern. It's the same kind of thing, but it's just that not constant S. It's just kind of the back and forth, slow walk the dog. Really good way if you've got a target that you're fishing around. That's a good way to bring the fish out of it. Okay, so then once you've kind of just got the basic retrieves down, then I like to impart a little bit harder half turn of the reel. That's really all you need when fishing swim baits, is a half turn of the reel. So a lot of times I like to do a straight retrieve and then a hard kick with a half turn of the reel. That hard kick is what'll generate a lot of those fish to come and bite. So you straight retrieve and then a hard kick. And that hard kick kind of gives it that fleeing motion, changes it up a little bit. And you can really get these things to glide a bunch too. You know, if you give them a little bit of slack, you can give them the turnaround. And that's one thing I like to do. If I'm fishing a target like a dock post, I like to slowly reel it up to the dock post and then give it a hard turn and give it a little slack, and that bait will wrap around the dock post and like look behind the dock post. Really good way to trigger strikes. You know, if you get that bait to turn around and look back at what's coming at it, that can be good. But if you know, a lot of times if a fish is being chased by a bigger predator, they don't turn around and look at it. They flee from it. And that's one thing that I've always thought is kind of a little bit of a misconception with glide baits. Like, if I'm straight retrieving, I don't necessarily want my bait to turn around and look at that fish. I want it, at that point, I'll give it a hard turn and kind of that quick fleeing motion, and that seems to work better for me. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't work by turning the bait all the way around. I think it's really cool when you get a bait to turn all the way around on itself, but it doesn't necessarily do you much good when that happens, because that's not natural. But if you can wrap it around a dock post, that kind of indicates to a predator fish that that bluegill's going to feed, or that shad's going to feed on some plankton on the dock post, which is different than it just trying to get away in open water. So the next retrieve and the last one, if I'm fishing really clear water, I'll be a lot more aggressive, you know, with a quick retrieve and then kill it. Like a quick retrieve and kill it. You know, I'll make 3-4 handle turns at a quick pace and then kill it. And that will get it to give that more erratic motion in that clear water, which is what you need a lot of times to generate those strikes. I'm getting some leaves here. But I don't like to do that in dirty water, because there's no reason to, because, you know, in dirty water, you're trying to let those fish look at it a little bit more and find the bait. In clear water, you know, if you're fishing smallmouth or something, a quick 3-4 reel turns is really good. So I hope that was helpful, guys. The one thing I want to stress is use your reel to impart the action in the bait. Don't be snapping the rod. If you use the rod more, you'll end up getting the hooks caught more on the bait with the line, and it just becomes a little bit harder to use. So use the reel to impart the action and just play around with it, because some swim baits and glide baits don't work great with one action or one reel turn versus other swim baits. So you got to play around with each swim bait. Just because it doesn't fit your need or the way you like to work, it doesn't make it a bad glide bait. It just makes it have a different use than the ones you may be familiar with. So I hope that was helpful, guys. Stay tuned, more tips and tricks coming out.